Get ready to dive in, perhaps have your thoughts altered, but of course, that's always your choice in the end. We won't hold it against you if you don't change your opinion through this episode. But today we're speaking with Beth Allison, discussing the popularized but sometimes polarized word adulting. Beth speaks about telling your own story, how we need to stop shitting ourselves, and the power of social media. Join us as we talk about making noise, being our best selves, and why we should stop using the word adulting. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we're here to burst that bubble today. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives. We're excited to delve into all of those. We're your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. We're thrilled today to be chatting with Beth Allison. You might recognize her as one of the hosts of Camp Code, and we're so grateful she's able to spend some time here with us on Beyond Camp. Beth began her full-time career as co-director in Ontario, Canada, and 10 years later became the executive director of not one, but 5 summer camps. She's since gone on to create Camp Hacker with her husband Travis, becoming a founding member of Go Camp Pro, and is now an author, trainer, and international speaker, as well as one of the founding members of the Women in Camp Summit. Her goal is to make everyone she's the privilege to meet feel valued and affirmed for who they are. And she's a sucker for a great acronym. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. It is a pleasure and a true honor to be here. I'm so excited. You folks are just diving into everything, and the buzz about you is so big. I'm just honored to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Cassie and I actually met for the first time at the Women in Camp Summit, so partially because of what you've created.
Very good. I'm happy to know that too.
Today we're going to talk about adulting, and I'm really fired up for this conversation. If you haven't heard me say it before, I'm a millennial, which is a controversial age group, as we're all aware, and I'm on the tail end of it, just to be clear. It's a large age group. And this topic came to me. I was having a conversation at the Women in Camp Summit, which, by the way, registration is live. So if you haven't registered already, here's my plug for it. We seem to talk about it every episode we have. And I was using the phrase adulting, as I often do. And I think Beth was walking by and just like popped in. It was like, Rachel, let me tell you why I hate this word. And ever since then, it's been on my mind, and it's made me think twice about how I use it. And it's been a conflicting thought for me because I really feel like adulting is part of my identity. And Cassie and I use adulting all the time when we talk to each other, especially in the pandemic, when sometimes it seems like it's a lot of work to just get out of bed in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But before we dive on into that, Beth, tell us a little bit about your journey into camping.
So it began when I was 10, and my parents sent me to summer camp with my best friend. And I had the most glorious 10 days and went back every single summer. I was a camper until I was old enough to be a CIT. And then I was a counselor for 2 years. And then I was on resource staff for 3 years. I was a lit director because it had changed from CIT to LIT by the time I got there. And it was my favorite job before I began directing. So I loved it. And for me, I was never really great at anything growing up. I was good at a few things, but I wasn't great until I began serving at camp. So for me, it's kind of where I felt like my gifts and talents could be of use and make a difference. So after I graduated from university, I kind of thought camp days are behind me, until 7 years later, a friend who was directing another camp convinced me to come and work for her for the summer, serving as the administrator. I realized how much I had missed the camp world. So I did that for 3 summers while I was staying at home with my wee baby boys at the time during the school year. And then in 1995, I had the opportunity to become the full-time director, with my husband Travis, at the camp that I grew up at. So my kids had a great childhood of spending every summer at camp since they were very, very small.
That's phenomenal. And also, I will say a bit unique in that I often talk to camp professionals now, and they'll be like, my parents sent me to summer camp and I hated it. I hear that far more often than I think, that like they have this like memory of like just like sobbing and being like, take me home.
I was sobbing on the other end.
I love that.
I didn't want to leave. From the first moment, I loved everything about it.
That's fantastic.
That's so great. The other thing I always think of when I hear people's stories is they didn't go to camp at all as well. Like it's that very rarely is it like really good, positive experiences that bring us into working at camp.
No, I loved it. Every second of it. Still miss it.
Excellent. One of the other questions we love to ask our guests is about the pandemic, because it's playing a big part of everybody's lives right now. What's one of your biggest takeaways from living in this time?
So for me, I would say that my professional and my personal takeaways are both exactly the same. So it's the power and importance of connection, and how I feel like we've been taking it for granted, and we need to get back to working really extra hard on making those connections. So I guess the takeaway for me has been the reinforcement of the importance of people and relationships and reaching out to each other, and that need to talk to each other instead of talking over one another, of taking that breath before responding, both in person and online, and to hear, take that minute to hear the fear and the concern and the panic that sometimes people have with everything that's going on, and that need to try harder to treat everybody with kindness and think about what it must be like from the other person's point of view. For me, I really believe that we're created to be in relationship with each other, and it's imperative that we work together and care for each other and try to see that bigger picture and not just our own little piece of it all the time. But it's become harder and harder through the pandemic. And I think that we need to strive to get back to that, because it's those safe connections that are really fundamental for meaningful lives. And I think we've strayed way out there. And I guess so for me, that in essence, the world needs camp more than ever before. Yeah, is sort of my takeaway.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it ever? And I want to just take us back a couple sentences there. You mentioned to take a breath before we say something. And I think that's just so important, that we have that moment to think about what we're saying before we say it, or think about what we're going to type before we type it as well. Yes. And it might allow us to see the bigger picture and how that might impact another person.
Mm-hmm. And I've really seen so much of hurt and meanness, and sometimes from people and places that you just don't expect it to be from. And I think it's because we're all so caught up in this stress and anxiety and tension and fear. So I think camp has a lot of lessons we can teach the rest of the world. I think that all the time, but I really think in a pandemic, we have a lot of work we can share on how we deal with things.
We could have a whole podcast series just on that.
Yes, 100%.
We'll follow up on that later. So beyond camp, we love to talk about identities here. And so we've started asking our guests about how you would identify yourself. What words would you use to identify yourself?
Okay. Well, I'm a cisgender woman, and my pronouns are also she and her. But if you were asking me for words also that I use to identify myself, I would say partner, mother, very recently grandmother.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited about that. I would also say that I'm a Canadian. That's really important to me. I'm a feminist. I'm an introvert. I am a recovering perfectionist, so always a work in progress for me. A communicator, a lover of the written word. And I try really hard to be a self-esteem builder and a developer of community.
What an incredible list of words. And I think what you've really hit on there is that there's so many different ways that we identify. And often people think of just the ones that are sort of like buzzwords. Like people will often think about, like your gender identity, your sexual orientation. Those are things we're used to talking about. And identity is so much more than that. So thank you for going so broad with those descriptors. That's
You're welcome. I don't know if that was too broad, but anyway, it's just when I think about myself, that's sort of where I put myself.
It's so great. It gave me a few new words for myself.
Good.
So along with identity, we often talk about our privilege that comes with different parts of our identity as well. Do you think about your privilege?
I think I have always thought about my privilege. So even as a young student, I traveled, and I thought then about how fortunate I was to be able to do that, to have had parents who could help me financially to do that and see parts of the world where here in Canada, maybe we had advantages that they didn't. I thought about it when I was in university, and again, how I got to do that, and maybe not everyone did. I thought about it when I first got married in 1985, that not everybody back then could get married. I think I've kind of like always thought about it, and I've always tried to treat everybody I came in contact with the same respect and dignity and equality. So I think I've always thought about it, but I haven't always done enough about it. And so now I'm intentionally working to be more actively listening and paying attention and reading and listening to podcasts and learning and figuring out what I need to do more about it instead of just think about it.
I really thank you for sharing those two halves, because I think that's something a lot of people might identify with, is like, yeah, I know this exists and I've thought about it, but what have I actually done to understand what that means?
And for me, one list is way longer than the other. And so I really need to do the work.
Mm-hmm. So we've also been seeing a lot of conversations about privilege in the camping world. What privilege do you think you carry in camping?
Well, I am Caucasian. And so sadly in our world, that always brings privilege. My age, I think, brings me privilege in this industry, because we tend to think of age equals experience equals wisdom. And that equation doesn't always ring true. Wisdom doesn't always just come with age. I also have a voice in the industry, mostly due to my husband's privilege and his hard work. He encouraged me to start speaking and sharing my insights after I finished directing. And I got to use his platform and begin with his audience. So I didn't even have to start from scratch, which then led me to being part of like an amazing podcast team. And because of that opportunity, we've been chosen to speak at conferences, and all of that has been privilege. So for me, certainly in this industry, having that voice and that platform is privilege.
I really like what you said there, that it was your privilege that you had your husband's space, but in that platform, but in a wonderful way, that was his way of using his privilege to open the space up to somebody else. And I think that that's something that Travis does really well.
He does.
It's something that we, that's why we're here. But it's also something that we should be aware of, that having privilege means that we can open our spaces to more voices. So I just wanted to point out that distinction.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive in, Beth.
Okay.
I love to use the term adulting. Whether it's like doing my banking, whether it's meal prepping for the week, I'm like, oh, look at me, like I'm adulting. Like I put away my laundry on the same day I washed it. And I congratulate myself on, I'm adulting. And Cassie and I have these conversations. Just yesterday, Cassie was like, oh yeah, like I adulted today. And I was like, oh, good for you. So tell me, Beth, how do you define adulting?
Okay, can I back up a little bit and talk about how I see the word defined by society? So
Sure.
Rightly or wrongly, this is sort of where I'm coming from. So I think the word has become popular because BP, or before pandemic, our young people, our young adults, so our millennials, but also now our Gen Zers, I like to say, but I think it's Zers, but anyway, are overly stressed and overly scheduled, with huge expectations put upon them and huge barriers in their way to do all of these things that they're expected to do from an older generation. So keep in mind, I'm the very last year of the boomers. Okay, so that's where I fit in. So that older generation tends to expect that everybody's going to graduate from a great school and get an amazing high-paying job and buy a house and do all the things. And looking at the world, even pre-pandemic, but especially now, and these millennials, I think, and younger people are saying, how am I supposed to do all of this stuff in this mess that you have left to me? And folks are just struggling to keep up, and not just young people. So people are longing for those days when they can check out and not be responsible for something. So somebody has coined this phrase, adulting. And in my mind, I see it as implying that being an adult isn't a necessary part of growing up, but it's rather this life choice that you might hesitantly fully buy into sometimes. So I really want people to understand here that I get why your generation, Rachel and Cassie, use the word adulting. I feel like you folks are stretched to the max and more anxiety ridden and pressured than any other time in society on a day-to-day basis. And I get all of this. And I think it's an area that we need to focus on fixing with our work in summer camps. I just happen to feel really strongly that by using the word adulting as we know it, we're not doing anybody any favors, and in fact can be doing our staff a disservice and contributing to the problem and the pressures by using the word. So here's my problem in a nutshell. Remember, I'm a wordsmith, so I love language. I think that it's really powerful and it has the ability to shape who we are. So I would just like to get rid of it, like right out of our lexicon, or have summer camps lead the way to help change the way we understand it and take back its power. For me, the definition, like when I looked it up, people kept saying adulting in it, it just sat wrong with me. So I looked it up, and it's the practice of behaving in a way characteristic of an adult, especially the accomplishments of mundane but necessary tasks. So by this definition, what is it that you're doing when you're adulting? Laundry, paying the bills, cleaning your house, renewing your driver's license, going to work. And usually this means at a job you're not passionate about. So yes, I have gotten on my soapbox about it at several conferences. And in fact, one conference, Ruby walked around with a little Rubbermaid stool that she took from her parents' house in Nashville, wrote the word soapbox on it, and walked around until it was our session time, and then made me actually stand on it at that part of the session. The thing for me, as I look at it, is that I became an adult legally at 18. And I've been an adult for almost 40 years. And for me, I don't get to adult sometimes, and sometimes I don't. In my mind, I'm always an adult. But as an adult, I have responsibilities to the world, to my family, to my boss, to my co-citizens, and to myself. Also, as an adult, though, I get to say things like, today's a day where there will be no structured pants and no bra, where there will be like huge mugs of tea and an awesome book, or binge watching The Great British Bake Off on Netflix. Because as an adult, I'm aware that I sometimes need to unplug or slow down or practice self-care, but I'm always an adult. So for me, when we use that term adulting, we don't mean the fun things that we get to do as an adult. We don't get to say at 55 that I went to Harry Potter World with another adult and no children. We don't get to say that we can have snowball fights or sing or dance, have dance parties. Those aren't things that we consider as an adult. But the things that adults can choose to do are all of these things. So for me, the term adulting only speaks about those things which can create more responsibility, more pressure, more expectations to be met, and then leave us feeling less successful if we don't meet all of those. So I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who is well into her 40s, she is not a millennial. She said to me the other day, I didn't adult last night. I had canned soup for dinner. So meaning in her mind, you're only adulting when you go home after and she had a very insane and stressful day. I was there and part of it. But you're only an adult if you make like a healthy salad and grill some fish and set out plates and cutlery and stuff. She felt like a failure because she didn't adult. So rather than seeing that as an adult, it's okay to have canned soup for dinner when you have an insane day and you just want to climb in your jammies and have some chicken noodle, it's okay to make that decision, and it's not a failure or a sign if you didn't measure up. So I'd like us to stop using the word or reclaim it for what it actually should mean and talk to our staff about that. So I know I kept going, but that is my soapbox.
All right. There's so much in there that I want to unpack. No, it's okay. We're going to get into all of it, I hope, or most of it. We only have so much time.
I'm glad you have things to unpack, Rachel, because as often happens when Beth talks and I listen, I get left speechless. So
I've had too much caffeine to be speechless. So here we go.
Okay.
As soon as you start talking and you're like, okay, so we want to go back to this time where, like boomers thought that you grow up and you graduate and then you get married and you buy a house, et cetera, et cetera. In my mind, I was like, those are all, a lot of these expectations sound like they were made by white folks. And I think that that's really interesting. And it wasn't
Mhm.
something that I'd thought about with this term adulting. And even when we talk about like when you become an adult, in lots of different cultures, religions, folks come of age at very different times, and that looks like different things. And I think that that's fascinating. And I also think that the word adulting carries a lot of privilege with it. Like I
Mm.
went and I applied for a mortgage. That's a huge amount of privilege for me to be like, I'm adulting. But for folks who are having to work multiple jobs, put food on the table, care for younger siblings or other family members, they're not adulting. They're doing what needs to be done to get through the day, and they're not Instagramming about it. They're like, well, I got to go work my second job to help support, my younger siblings. Whereas my place of privilege is like, oh, I adulted because I had the time and privilege to be able to make a fancy meal and sit down and enjoy it with a glass of wine or whatever it is.
Right.
So I wanted to touch on that because that made me think of that, and I had never put that lens on it before, that I think that there's a lot of privilege that comes with the idea of adulting. So I guess when I think of adulting, and Cassie, feel free to jump in with your version of it, but I often think of adulting, when I'm being really productive, when I'm doing things that scare me. It's like a way, like a layer of protection almost. Like I can be like, oh, I adulted today. I did these like scary things or things that I was nervous about or didn't fully know how to do. Like maybe applying for a mortgage, going to buy a car, whatever it is. Which, let me just get on a little soapbox for a second. Why is it that most things in life we buy, the price tag is the price that you're going to pay, but cars and houses, like the price is who knows what it is? It's like made up. I don't
I will
understand.
join you on that soapbox.
It's ridiculous. Like if I want to buy a chocolate bar and it says $1.50, I'm going to pay $1.50. It's not going to depend on
But you don't
how
get to
many
go in and offer something else. I'm going to give you 97 cents. That's it. No more, just 97.
like that's not how it works. And there's no way of knowing how much the car is actually worth, really, because it's all different. Anyways, I'll step down from that. But I think that that's often when I use the phrase is when I'm afraid or like doing something brand new to me that nobody has taught me how to do either. Today, one of my former staff texted and she was like, me and my friend had to Google how to write a check for my student union. And I was like, oh, fascinating, because she'd never written a check before. She's in like fourth year university. So we use it for things like that. And then we also use it for really boring things that we think we're supposed to have a lot of time for and we don't always get to. Because I think our lives are more overprogrammed than they've ever been before. Something that I saw recently was somebody said, all these things that you used to do, like come home and have like a sit down dinner and like have laundry done in a perfectly clean house, were done when one partner, typically the woman, was home. Um,
Yes.
Not when you living by yourself or all your roommates or whatever your family situation is. We're all out of the house all day or in your home office all day in the pandemic life. Um, working all these jobs and then also trying to get all the household things done. So yeah, I think I use the word adulting when I'm both scared and doing boring things that I feel pressure to do and feel like a failure for not doing, like you said.
And I think that's the part I want us to get rid of. I'm excited to hear that you feel like an adult when you do scary things or something for the first time. That's exciting for me, but that isn't, in my mind, adulting. It's just being an adult. It's just being a grown up and knowing that you can try new things and maybe fail and try again and have those kinds of successes and lessons learned. But I think too many, in my experience, the reason I got so annoyed with the word was because too many use the second of your situation, not the first. All the things that they felt they had to do, all these expectations, all these pressures, and often mundane tasks that don't bring any joy. But there was the expectation that they should be doing them. And in Camp Code, we always tell people to stop shoulding on themselves, right? Because we're really great at saying we should be doing this and we should be doing that. So I think I want us to claim the word back, maybe to more of what you were talking about in the first half of that. That'd be great.
Before this has been fantastic and we've dove into so much and we're going to dive into more, after this. On my notebook here, for those of you who are watching this podcast, I have a stop shitting on yourself sticker right here representing Camp Code. Excellent. I see that all the time. Alrighty. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Camp has played a pivotal role in the lives of many, and for the first time, Camp pros are faced with innumerable new challenges in preparing for 2021 and their off-season programming. It's an unprecedented year, a unique year, and a challenging year, all rolled into one. The challenges facing a camp pro can feel insurmountable at times, but you aren't alone.
Camp pros can count on ACA Illinois to care for them, support them, and help them through this challenging time. ACA Illinois is here for camp pros to help them find their way through the months and years ahead.
As we look towards summer 2021 and the seasons in between, we know we can count on ACA Illinois to be there for us. The American Camp Association, Illinois, is dedicated to supporting their camp professionals and helping them navigate how to move ahead. For webinars, trainings, and resources on mental health, they are truly there for camp pros. Discover more about their work at acail.org. All right, we are ready to jump back in here. And beforehand, we were talking about the word adulting becoming popular and how it's almost become a catchphrase in today's younger people, millennial population, and just in general as well. And as we were talking, it had me thinking about how do we shift people's expectations of what it means to be an adult? But then also going around the idea of how has social media played a role in this and really shifted what it means to be an adult and defined or redefined the word adulting. Beth, do you have some thoughts?
Well, I'm one of those people that believes social media is all good and all bad all at the same time.
Yes.
And it has become like how we're social with one another, especially during a pandemic. So it's a vehicle that we use to connect with each other more than any other in our part of the world during a pandemic. And I think it's taken away that need for in-person conversations and those moments of being together to participate in important conversations. And in many ways, we've lost a lot through social media, that ability to have those one-on-ones and those, like, I think to myself sometimes about sitting around the campfire 30 years from now and going, Rachel, do you remember that awesome text that you sent me? And we laughed until we cried. And I just can't picture that as being this incredible moment. Like if I could say, remember we were at this Women in Camp Summit together or the OCA conference and we sat on the floor and we all ate chips out of a bag and, you know, like those I can picture saying, but it's the social media stuff I don't think is going to outlast the in-person stuff. But I certainly think that it has been responsible for helping to perpetuate this idea of adulting because people are Instagramming and they are not Facebooking so much anymore. That's what the boomers are doing. But, you know, tweeting and TikToking now, all the different things that they think they're doing when they are so-called adulting. And so it's reinforcing that, that expectation that you should be at some point in your day adulting somewhere, or at least some point in your week. And we need to celebrate that, to say, hey, look what I did, I adulted today. So I think social media has helped to continue that cycle that I would like to see broken.
And I think prior to the ad break, you said, you know, like we have to find joy, we have to do like adulting things and like they're not as exciting. And I think social media has made it seem like every moment of our life should be thrilling. Because that's what we're seeing, right? Like we're seeing a highlight reel. Instagram has a new Reels feature. Apparently I'm getting old. I cannot tell the difference between Reels and Instagram videos, lives. I don't even know. Somebody send me an email and explain this to me. Clearly I don't get it, but that's besides the point. I think it just constantly shows us that we should always be having fun, that we should be like, when we're doing laundry, it should be like bright and sparkly and this like wonderful moment. And then we should be like dancing as we mop our house and all of these things.
Yes. And everything should be filtered to look more beautiful and more perfect. So that expectation then is there one more time knocking at the door going, you're not good enough. You're not good enough, because my laundry room doesn't look like any of their laundry rooms. But my clothes still get clean, you know? So it's that constant expectation that's placed upon. I don't think it's helped. Social media in that regard hasn't helped for millennials and Gen Zers to say it's okay to be quirky and, you know, a failure sometimes and, you know, work on things and struggle with things. It's always like, look at my perfect life. Look at my perfect dinner that I'm Instagramming to you right now. Look at my perfect, you know, partner who gave me this perfect rose who, I mean, it's all of these things constantly all the time. And we're so hooked up to it, and even more so in the pandemic, I think, because we cannot be together in person.
Mm-hmm. So I think when you've talked about this, the reason it's stuck with me is because I really think that I claim to the phrase adulting as part of my identity. And I've thought about this and I've caught myself saying it. I'm like, oh, Beth said I shouldn't say that. Maybe I shouldn't say it. And then I've like wrestled with this, whether or not I should like take it out of my vocabulary or not, because I'm the kind of person who like, I need to feel strongly before I will like take something out. There's lots of words that I've tried to take out of my vocabulary. We can do another podcast on that. But this one I've really felt conflicted on. And I think sometimes it's because I don't feel like an adult because I haven't checked those traditional boxes of being an adult. I'm 28. My partner and I live with my parents. But I've also like I've run a summer camp and I sit on a board, and like those are all very adult things. But then I feel like sometimes it is cheapened by the fact that like I don't like own a house and like, or I'm not married or whatever it might be. And so I need to like prove that I'm an adult by doing these so-called responsible things.
I feel that too.
Sorry, Cassie, go ahead.
No, I feel that completely. And I think it's almost been because of camp that I don't have some of those landmarks in my life, like buying a house and doing all the stuff revolving around that. And am now, in a renting for the first time in my life. Like it's strange, but it's almost a little bit of a disservice that I don't want to say that, but it feels kind of like that in this moment.
Which part is a disservice?
That I'm having to pay a monthly bill for rent for the first time in over 15 years.
Right.
Yeah, because you've always had your housing provided for you at camp.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's that sense of expectation that everybody bumps up against is the part I want to get rid of. Who says, Rachel, that you should own a house by now? Who says this? And do we care that they say this? Like it's one of those, these are the conversations I want us to be having with our camp staff. Who says this is how you should be? Get your sticker out. Stop shitting on yourself. Like who says these, and does this bring you joy? Does this bring you passion? Does this give you a life that is fulfilled? I had camp housing until I was, like 30, 40 something years old. And it's, who says that these are the rules? And my parents, like all the way through me being a camp director, kept saying, so at some point you'll grow up and get a real job, right? As an adult. So it's I want to crush the expectations. I want to get rid of them. Like just stop and do you, and I think that's why I find that the term adulting for me, like just perpetuates this, is how I see it. So I just want to get rid of it, or better yet, keep using it, but reclaim it to mean something different.
I'm starting to see it. It's starting to formulate in my head, and I'm just still playing with this now. How do we shift the expectations? And I'm going to just look to camp because that's what we all know best. Why is it important that we tackle this as a camp community and help shift the expectation and redefine adulting?
So I want to be really transparent. If I get to the end of this podcast and you two still don't agree with me, I'm going to be okay. That you're entitled to think how you would like to think. So just let me put that there. But I think like camp is that place for me where we can do so much for young people that can't be done anywhere else. Even in loving, wonderful homes, having the opportunity to move out, especially if you're in camp all summer long with the same group of people in day camp, or if you are in a sleepaway camp situation where you're with people for a long period of time, being with all of those other people who have different ideas and different opinions and different voices and different thoughts than you do is so important to growing up healthy and well-rounded, and people challenging you to say, hey, I don't think this. What do you think of what this is? So, excuse me. For me, I think camp is that place where we can teach our staff that they can tell their own story. that there is power in telling their own story. Share what they think is important. So I'll go back to the good part of social media. I mean, I only slammed it earlier. But as you know, now everybody can be their own publishing empire. They have the power to put out there into the world what they are excited about or what they believe really strongly in. And so they can use it to pursue their passions. And I think, like everything else, we just have to choose to manage our social media and not have it manage us. It's a tool that we can use, and it's not a necessity we can't live without, but that is becoming harder and harder to train on new staff because it's an ever increasing part of everybody's days. So, you know, I think as camp people, we have that opportunity to have them there for those intense moments, those intense periods of time where we can have really deep conversations about how people feel. Where else would Rachel and I have a conversation about adulting and then say, hey, we need to make this a podcast episode? It's because summer camp takes that time to sit down and say, hey, what you have to think and what I have to think are important. So let's share all of that.
Yeah, I think that's fabulous. And I keep coming back to the privilege that comes with the word adulting. And I think it's because I can say that I adulted and did my laundry, but like nothing's going to happen if I didn't do my laundry. It's like I had the choice to do it. And that's because or whatever other chore it might be. And I have that privilege because I have the time or the space, or I have a washing machine here. I'm not at the laundromat. I can leave my stuff in the laundry for as long as I want until a sibling comes along and is like, you know, throws it wherever. So I guess there's a time limit on that. But there's a huge amount of privilege that comes with that. And as the summer camp community looks to address, you know, privilege and whiteness in summer camp, I think that this is part of that conversation. And so I think you're really onto something, Beth.
And I appreciate that because I hadn't thought of it like that before. Like, as you're saying it, it's like, yes, that makes perfect sense. But I hadn't put those two pieces together either. So I'm really grateful that you did.
Well, thanks. So part of my identity is being an adult, as is for Cassie, and we're legally adults and all that comes with that as well. And we've done like lots of traditionally like what we'd call adult things. Like we ran summer camps. We were responsible for children.
Other people's children.
Like other people's children.
Around the
staff,
clock. Like that's a big job.
Far more responsibility than most people our age would have.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you think we can help our staff and even like older campers find their identity as adults, and sort of like whether it be in camp or out of camp, and how we can work with them to see a positive version of themselves?
So I think that obviously this is one of the most important roles we have as camp professionals, as youth development professionals, is to help our people figure out how to be their very best selves. And I think being really intentional about the kinds of programs that we run and the camp culture that we're creating, where everybody is included and feels welcome and feels safe to take risks and try new things and fail and know that it's okay. So I don't know if Dr. G said this on your podcast yet, because it's still in my role of things I need to listen to next. But I do know that Dr. G says that resiliency is not a character trait, but it's a skill that we can build. So intentionally building resiliency into our staff training so that it becomes part of our camp culture for our staff and for our campers, I think is critical. Opportunities for them to try, fail, try again, and figure things out. So another thing we say at Camp Code all the time is to celebrate mistakes instead of mistakes. And I have my little celebrating mistakes Camp Code mug. And so, excellent. So literally celebrating a mistake. So for me, what I started doing many years ago at the end of staff training, and my staff training was like 10 days long, was asking at the end of each day, who made a mistake today? Who tried something new and it didn't go well? And celebrating the people who raised their hands and honoring that mistake. And then asking staff, what did you learn from that? And letting them know it's okay if they don't know the answer yet. So I want to point out that if you're going to try this, you have to go first. So you have to share a mistake that you made, and you have to say what it taught you. And maybe the second night you have some senior staff prepped and ready to go, just in case nobody wants to share. And you don't have to ask them to share the details of the mistake. That's not the important part. But you're creating that environment where people know it's okay to make them and that we celebrate them because it's how we learn. And I mean, that kind of lesson is invaluable. And I think too often in our society, this level, this expectation of perfection is out there, and social media is also responsible for part of that. Is that life has to be perfect and you have to be perfect. And so staff often these days will just have this inability to make a decision because they're so scared they're going to make the wrong one.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so giving staff opportunities to talk about these things during staff training and throughout the summer as you meet with them, giving them the opportunity to learn how to do things better, how to have conversations better, or, you know, step in between camper disagreements better, or facilitate things, whatever it is, and then letting them practice at leadership training more than once so that they kind of feel like, oh, I didn't do that so great that first time, but I want to try it again because I think I can do better. So having those kind of opportunities and then building in that support and letting them know where that is, right? So you're front loading with them. If you have a problem with this, here's where you go. If you have a problem with this, here's where you go. So setting them up with that support, but then sending them off and saying, I empower you to make decisions. I empower you to do these things. And if you make a mistake, it's going to be okay. Certain things we need to make sure we're not making mistakes on at camp, but other things, it's going to be okay. I think the other thing we can do is we really need to help our staff find their voice. So I was doing some reading the other day and I came across this quote, and I didn't write down who it was from, and I wish I had, but it basically said, if you want to be heard, you have to make some noise. So I think we need to ask our people often and in different ways, what do you want to make noise about? What's important to you? What's your passion? What problem do you want to solve? What gets you jumping out of bed in the morning? How do you want to make a difference? How do you want to leave your legacy? And how can I support you in that? So creating programs at camp that encourage them to do this kind of thinking. So you can encourage them to use their social media skills to share their dreams and their ideas, and use social media to make some noise, but some really positive noise.
That's really neat. And I love the making mistakes. In our staff office at camp, we used to have a hashtag my bad board where you put mistakes. And I was the first one to put one there because all the staff, like the entire camps, like 100 kids or over 100 kids, were all like going to sit in part of the parking lot or something in the sun for an activity. And I was like, no, like have them sit in this field right here. They all sat in the field. It was great. They did their thing. And then they all had to get up to walk to the waterfront. Did I not make every child sit on a field that was full of ground wasp nest, and 100 children and all the staff just like wandered over the ground wasp nest, and they were screaming, and oh, it was something else. For like the next year, 2 years after that, everybody just like avoided that field. We just like didn't use that field. But I put that on the hashtag my bad board, made the whole camp sit in a field of wasp nests.
And that to me is brave, it's vulnerable, but it also says to the rest of your staff, it's okay to say, I screwed up. And here's the lesson I learned is maybe check out the space before I move in, because you were thinking shade, grass, not hot parking lot, asphalt. You were thinking all those things, but didn't, check. So that to me needs to be celebrated. Like that's a great thing that you were willing to do that, and that you had a board that did that sort of thing. To celebrate everybody else who comes up and goes, okay, here's that. Like when I told them how I screwed up, like they literally couldn't believe it. Like they could not believe that I had done that as an experienced camp director. And they were stunned. And I think that made them go, okay, she's willing to share that. That's impressive. And it sort of helped. It helped start the process. It's a pretty awesome story.
I love that. Whoops, my bad. I put whoops, my bad in a financial adjustment on a sheet the other day at work. I was like, yep, that was my bad. Whoops, fixed it.
Well, and it's claiming responsibility too, right? Because oftentimes that's the other thing is because of this fear of not being perfect, you don't want to say that was something, you didn't do it. It's often where young kids don't want to claim that responsibility and be called out or be made fun of or any of those sorts of things. And so that's when we start going, oh, that wasn't me. I didn't do that. Or coming up with all these excuses instead of just, oh, I'm really sorry. That was completely my fault. And here's what I learned.
Yeah, I think that's the more adult thing to do.
Mm-hmm. But it's something that we need to learn, right? Like we
Yeah.
need to be taught that, and we need to have opportunities to try that out and see how it feels. Because I'm sure for you, Rachel, it felt pretty awful to have made your camp sit in a bunch of ground wasps. Like you feel terrible. And it, in essence, that's a different kind of a fault, because it wasn't something you weren't thinking or any of those kinds of things. Like, so you need to sit in that and sort of feel, take the time to feel what that feels like, to say, oh, okay, I screwed up. And everyone doesn't look like they hate me. Okay, this is good. And my friends are still talking to me, and my boss is working with me on how to do it better next time. Like, we need to have those opportunities. And I think they come up at camp far more often than any place else. At school, it's all about the grade. Like if you didn't get the 98 or the A+ or whatever, it's all, you're ranked, but you don't get to try it again in most places, and do it over.
Well, and I think that that's a really great point, that part of being an adult, or in adulting, is making mistakes. Like every CEO, every camp director, politician, doctor, whoever, like people make mistakes. This happens.
Yes.
And I think that really counters my idea of like needing to be perfect and productive all of the time. So we are almost out of time, but I will say that next time that I want to have like cake for breakfast, I'm going to say I'm adulting. Thank you, Beth, for letting me know that, because I'm an adult, I get to make my own food choices, and I'm going to eat
That's
my cake
right.
for breakfast.
Absolutely.
That's my new version of adulting.
I'm okay with that, because you do get to do that. And as an adult, you know that if you did that every day, you'd feel a little ill. But every so often, you can do that. And as an adult, you know that.
What a great spot to end and wrap up today on. Let's have our cake for breakfast and make our own choices every day as an adult. So thank you, Beth, for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I think our views may have shifted a little bit.
I'm okay with that.
Would you be willing to share with us how guests can get in touch with you before we move on?
Absolutely. You can email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro. You can find me on Instagram at topazfae, F-A-E, and on Twitter at topaz.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So at the end of our episode, we love to talk about recharging. And recharging has to do with self-care. And we believe that it's critical to one's personal wellness in both the good times and maybe the not so good times, when maybe you're not quite as much of an adult as you would like to be that day. But it's also something we find that camp professionals struggle with. So we think about recharging our batteries and what makes us feel inspired. So our tip/trick for you this week comes from myself, and it's about sleep. It's something I've been struggling with lately: falling asleep, getting to sleep, staying asleep. So I've been working towards using and getting back into Yoga Nidra, which was something I really enjoyed before moving. And it's a yogic sleep, but stuff similar to that is both available on HeadSpace and Audible, which we will put in our show notes for everybody today. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I may have slept through most of those classes because I was absolutely exhausted, but with practice, you can actually rest your body and your mind.
That's really cool.
I know, it's interesting. It took a while, but it was worth it. So we want to thank you for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us wherever we may go. And we want you to be able to reach out and connect with us. You can reach myself, Cassie, at cassie.bloy@stefanricard.ca. Rachel?
Folks are always welcome to send me an email at kentar@girlguides.ca. And if you can explain the difference between Instagram, I don't know, live videos and reels, send me an email, please.
You can CC me on that too. Not really sure why there's two different things. Please remember to check out our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Another wonderful and large thank you to Beth for joining us here today, to the team at GoCamp Pro for holding space for all of these amazing conversations, to the team at ACA Illinois for their continued support and sponsorship of this podcast, to our editor, Jotham, and our producer, Matt, for taking on the challenge of making us sound amazing every week, and to you, our listeners, for continuing to listen. Thank you. Beyond Camp is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Be sure to check out all the other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.